Hello everyone and welcome to Path, Passion, Purpose. I have the pleasure of actually speaking to Chloe today in her beautiful London home with slim errands behind us, and potentially our conversation will take us there. But first I want to thank Chloe for welcoming us here today, and I'm super excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm excited too.
So Chloe, in a minute I want to take us to why you built Kama. But first, one of the things I'm most impressed with you, and I personally super relate, is to speak about your highly successful but very untraditional career path. And so I believe that already with 26, you made it as a senior partner, as an associate partner at one of the biggest architectural companies in the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And in most instances, that's the end of the journey, right? Like you make that partner, you're in the biggest firm, it stops, whereas like your journey took you completely different. So can you take us back to the start of your career, so to speak?
For sure. I was born in Paris and I grew up with my mother and my sister. So it's quite a small family structure with just women. And my mom was very artistic. And I grew up with a fair amount of financial insecurity, which I often connected with the fact that she was an artist. And that made it very hard actually to sustain a family financially when that's your skill set. And so I think I grew up with this awareness that even though I was also myself quite a creative, always drawing, always making things with my hand, I had to be a little bit more responsible with my choices of career because I didn't want to suffer from the same pains that she was experiencing. And so as I developed, going towards the end of my school years, I identify architecture to be one of the most stable, recognized discipline and profession within the creative industries. And in a sense, that was already an important realization that creative skills were not actually really valued in our society, and that even though we know how important it is for our culture and we value it as individual in our personal journey, when it came to how that's represented in the professional world, creative people are the least paid people, right? So I chose architecture and I went to the Beaux-Arts in Paris, which is a very old school that has existed for a long time. And at the end of my third year, I was well aware that I needed to find a job. And so I decided to look for a job in London a bit randomly. And I took a bag for 2 weeks. I had borrowed clothes from my sister because I had never worked before. And I went to London and I showed up at Norman Foster for the summer training program. And they hired me. And I have to say, I started there and I really didn't know anything about the job. At Les Beaux-Arts, I was learning how to draw nude and how to recreate corniches and nothing to do with the actual job. So I had to really hold on to the furniture and do everything I could to make myself busy. But then lucky enough, at the end of the 2 months, they wanted to keep me. And so I did something really unconventional. My school and Norman Foster agreed that I would be allowed to continue to be a student while working full-time at Foster's in London, as long as I would go back to Paris to pass my exam 3 times a year. So for 3 years, I worked full-time at Foster's, which was already crazy and very demanding. The workplace was very different from what it is today. You had to be on the desk for hours, to be valued. You remember? And then I would go back on the Eurostar, learn all this knowledge that I had to exam on. And as you know, at that age, you can just absorb knowledge. It goes here and then 2 days later, it's come out again. But at least I would pass the exams. And so I graduated very young. But most importantly, when I graduated, I had years of experience, which is why by the time I was 26, I was able to become an associate partner and start running my own project, which was also crazy because I didn't really know that much. So I really had a career that was about fake it until you make it, within architecture, and also realizing over the years that actually it's not a very creative industry. It's very technical. It's very detail orientated. At Foster's is a huge, thousands of people work there, and you get to do cubicles for 3 weeks or one room, So it's after a while, being pregnant with my second son, in 2007, I decided I need to get out of architecture.
I relate to this journey so much, but from a lawyer's angle, because I also skipped 3 years. Otherwise, you can't make that young partner at all. And one of the reasons why I left was the same. At some point I realized like half of my professional me is missing because of creativity. And I want creativity in my life, whatever that means. Okay, but next you did another really amazing thing, because you were one of the co-founders of Made.com, which is a huge company too. So from living a highly corporate successful life, how did you become such a successful entrepreneur? Most people don't even make it through the first year. So what happened next?
I was poached by Brian Hoberman, and he had created lastminute.com. He had left that project, but he was very well known to be a successful entrepreneur who really participates to building this ecosystem in the UK. So when he heard about me, a little bit randomly, he was building a design and interior platform. That was his next project, and he didn't have anyone coming from the design world. So when I met him, he knew he needed me. I didn't know what he was talking about. I had no idea. All the things he was mentioning didn't make sense, but I trusted that what he sees in me, he knows what he's doing. So I completely blanked it again and decided to just make the jump and follow the thread, the invitation, really thinking it would simplify my life, make my family life more comfortable, more flexible. And of course, this didn't really happen. And after two years, a bit working with him, 3 years working with him, we spinned off into Made.com because the platform that he was building was a very technical project. And again, I was missing the creative, building a brand, being in touch with customers, doing also something, tangible. So Made.com became an opportunity for us to go into homeware retailing using the internet and make it smart. And we teamed up with 2 other co-founders, and so 4 of us went into business in 2010 and launched Made.com, which, as you know now, grew very fast, became a very big success in the UK. For me, it was one of those crazy experiences where I had to learn everything in the job. I'd never done anything. I've never done product development. I mean, a little bit at Foster's, but really was not exactly the same. I was responsible for all the brand, all the images, all the marketing material, producing the visual, the creative expression of the brand, basically. So as much as it was like my favorite, that this was the biggest way that I expressed myself as a creative, it was still exhausting, and it was definitely not flexible, and I had to travel a lot, and my kids at the time were 3, 5, 4, 6, etc. So at a time as well where as a mother you constantly compromising, you're never really able to fulfill the job of a mother and fulfill your work, because there's a tension between the two.
And I don't want to skip over Soho House because you were also the chief creative officer there, but I want to slowly move towards actually how did you discover what you're truly passionate about and what you're doing today? When did this start? Did this start during this time, during the Soho time? Like, when did this whole passion towards I want to be in the world of educating on pleasure, basically the entire world in a way, through an app, through my own business, when did the journey start?
It's something I ask myself a lot, also because I want to pass that knowledge into my kids. I want them to find their genius earlier and then to focus only on connecting with that and not wasting time doing what other people expect or what society is telling them. I really believe that that's really the key. I think that for me, where I came from, I spent a big part of my life finding stability, repairing some of the gaps and lack and fears that I experienced growing up, which was reflected in the way that I was in my family, etc. So at the beginning, I wasn't really identifying that this is what I'm looking for. I was just thinking I need to be financially stable, I need to have a career that makes me independent so I will never depend on someone else, and I wouldn't have the experience, let's say, that my mother had. So it's only when I had my burnout, when I left Made in 2015, I was just exhausted. I had put so much into it. It was stressful. The company was growing so fast that I was also losing connection with, is it what I want to do? Is it the shape of an organization that I feel comfortable in, with hundreds of people, 7 different countries to run, etc. And I decided to step down. And I think I learned a big lesson as an entrepreneur, is that you may be brilliant at starting a business, but there's going to be a point where maybe you're no longer the best person for the job. And it's important to let go of your ego and think that because you created it, you're always going to be the best person for it, and actually really allow for others to take on and do the scaling aspect, which is a very different job. So even though I was really burnt out, I knew it was the right decision for me to step down. And it's when I reached my bottom, when I was actually no longer able to support myself, and I was exposed to just fatigue and the stress, that I realized I need to rethink what's right for me, how to live a professional life that is in harmony with my values. So the first was more about the type of work and the type of professional expression that would facilitate for my well-being and not compromise my family life, my personal health, etc. And the idea behind sexuality being a topic of, that has become now my passion, really initially was personal experience of realizing I've never really asked myself questions around this until quite late. Only late in my 30s, early 40s, I started to really ask myself, what is my sexuality? Do I enjoy sex? Do I enjoy pleasure? Am I able to all the things, that as we were saying earlier, we never really get told that relationships are at the core of our well-being in all aspects of our life. And why don't we spend time reflecting on what we want, who do we enjoy being around, who makes us feel safe, all the things. And at the time, I really felt initially that there was a business opportunity because, this is my mindset. I have a passion, yes, but how can I turn it into a good business? So it became obvious that there was an opportunity to reshape sex education in a mainstream, central pillar of the conversation, our evolution, our self-improvement, our growth, and that the same way as other things like physical health, mental health, conscious leadership can become an avenue for actualization, it became very clear that reflecting on your relationship with intimacy and pleasure and romantic relationship is actually a really good lens into yourself.
So I had the privilege and honor to be here the other evening for a workshop of yours, and frankly, coming in, and I saw a mutual friend before, actually for lunch, and she was like, don't worry, nothing to be nervous about. I came in not knowing what it would be, and interestingly, I think it was better than any therapy session I had, and because we connected even to Kundalini Yoga, which I love, and to healing and to self-realization. We actually didn't speak much about sex, frankly, or our pleasure as such. We talked about relationships to ourselves and others, and I had some really great, even trauma. So we talked about trauma, and I think that's so important because, to your point, at the core of, for me, what meaningful life is our relationships. It takes a while to understand because you've been sold a different story. And I have a similar path with my parents and mother and father, etc. to I think what you just hinted to, but I don't know. And so it took me a while to realize that these relationships and how we relate to ourselves is really what will bring us joy, meaning, and etc. in life. And trauma is part of that. How do we heal the trauma? But I guess also our relationship to sex is a huge also factor in healing trauma and finding therefore our highest consciousness. I don't want to go too much off topic, but I thought what you were sharing the other night so amazing. Do you want to bring a bit of that into the conversation?
Yeah, the interesting thing for me was that I went into it with my own personal question, which really started around pleasure, how can I have better sex, how can I have healthy sex while being pregnant or after having children, how to continue to really make that a part of my life. And it is by researching and going deeper and deeper that I realize how big this topic is really, and how much of the shame that surrounds it is stopping us from accessing a very important truth about who we are, how we actualize, what's blocking us from self-expression, from self-realization, from tapping into our genius. The shame is such a big layer of it pushes away from that connection. And as you say, at the core of relationship is the relationship with ourselves. Do we know ourselves? Do we know our desires? Do we know what turns us on? Do we have a capacity to ask for what we want and express what we want, right? So at the core of everything is this thing we never get told, which is get to know yourself. And when you get to know yourself, it's not just sitting and thinking who you are. That's one of the questions. Who am I? Who am I? Maybe one day you hear an answer. But there's also the sensorial human experience, that this particular experience here as human is the body, is the sensorial, is the experiential, that's about feeling and sensing and all of the also qualities of being human that are often not visible, the sensuality, the attraction, the magnetism, being able to connect deeply, intimacy. These things are not always easy to understand because we don't explain them and they're not part of the scene, world. It's not something you can grab and take. Exactly. So it takes training, it takes skill for people to be good at relationship. It's not something that we're born with. And we kind of take it for granted that we learn everything else, right? And we want to be good at sex and we want to be good at relationship, but we never train, we never study it, we never feel permitted to ask questions. We don't have conversation with our close friends or family. We sometimes don't have conversation with our partners, and we expect that it's going to work out. It just doesn't make sense. So it just felt to me like, let's break the taboo. And what happens when we break the taboo? When we are able to communicate, like I did during the event, simple facts about the reality that anyone can connect with. And then comes the common sense. People are able to adopt often what I say because it just makes sense. I don't have to convince people.
The first time I heard you speak at the live event in Ibiza, I actually, and there were several other speakers also speaking on this topic, I actually realized what a huge taboo that topic is. Like, I've never been conscious about, I never thought about, sex as a topic. Do I engage with it? Do I learn about it, etc.? Yes, maybe when you're very young, your parents do the whole, especially as a woman, be as good as you can forever. But then no one tells you anything anymore. And I realized how uncomfortable I felt. And I was like, this is not natural. This cannot be natural. I love learning in every area of my life, and something so fundamental, my first reaction is I shouldn't go there. And so therefore I really respect the work you're doing, and I don't think it's easy. Especially, I can relate to the person also you were in your 26-year-old A-type version. The fact that you went all this way to be this today, I highly admire it. I would love to learn a little bit more about the app, and also usually we ask 3 questions. What can you implement immediately into your life to make it better? And this can be to the point, as you said, asking yourself the right questions, or maybe something else. What can people do to feel more comfortable around this taboo topic and actually explore and learn?
Yeah, so the first thing is to think that what is your well-being? Question what makes you feel good, and really start investigating all the things you do that makes you feel good, but not from an intellectual place, right? Because that's where we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of focus. If you think of your day and you think, how many minutes of the day was I in my body? Actually feeling my body, in contact with sensation, in contact with something sensorial. It's very little. We spend the entire day in our head, right? So the first thing with what I do is to give people an opportunity to create balance between being stuck in your head, which most people are suffering from, and finding a way that is easy, fun, to be in your body. And that could be meditation in a way. You could try to calm your mind and your thought process by meditating, but it's very difficult to do. It requires to be quite advanced, actually, to have quite a lot of mastery of stillness and all sorts of things that most people just don't have. That's why they're struggling. So my discovery was that sensoriality and pleasure is a brilliant modality for well-being, because when you are touching and tasting and smelling and you're doing it with presence, you are in your body. You're no longer in your head. That's that simple. So the first thing would be make a conscious effort to do sensorial things as many times as you can during the day. If you're going to be eating something, just try to really focus on what that is. Taste it, understand the taste, the texture. It's like a form of reprogramming, it's working with the plasticity of the body, that if you do conscious practices and you do them repeatedly, it will eventually change your chemistry and you will start feeling more regulated. You'll be in state of homeostasis. You will be able to have therefore less stress. The hormonal mix in your body would be oxytocin and maybe dopamine and serotonin, really good hormones that actually help co-regulate you further, rather than the kind of unconscious, even when we go to the gym and we exercise, but we just want to get through with it and we're listening to something, in a way, we are not really present in your body. So what I believe is that there's been a conscious effort from our society to get us stuck in our head, where we can be much more easily controlled through consumer messages and be told what to do. And that the exercise of dropping into your body is like a form of rebellion, to be good enough as you are and starting to find satisfaction with really small things that you can do to yourself, like touching yourself, giving yourself pleasure, turning, self-pleasure as a focus. We talk a lot about self-love. Okay, so that's very important, how you talk to yourself. How much time in your day do you do something you really enjoy? And that's another way to fulfill that contract with yourself, that if you're not feeling good and content with who you are, then it's going to be really hard for you to access, the next stage of your evolution. You first need to be in harmony with who you are and being able to listen to that. So the first thing I would recommend is this: connect to your senses. If you are crossing a park, embrace it. Really, when you drink, when you eat, it's very simple. Sometimes people look at me like, yeah, and I was like this when I started. But eventually, years later, that's the advice I give. The second thing would be prioritize self-pleasure. It's called masturbation, and that makes it very focused on one area of the body. Think of self-pleasure, of physical pleasure, whether you want to go and get a massage, whether you want to ask your partner to just, give you nice touch for 10 minutes. Try to do this with no expectation for nothing else. Treat pleasure as a priority, physical pleasure as a number one priority for well-being, and see how many ways you can experience this with yourself. And don't stop with the shame. Because my discovery has been that everywhere there is shame, pleasure is sitting just underneath, and everywhere there is fear, pleasure is sitting just underneath. And the pleasure is the empowerment, is when you can embrace, life just as it is. And I think that that's what we need to reconnect with. And then the third thing I would say is to start journaling your sexual history. Try to, the way you do with everything else, understanding your childhood, your trauma, your family structure, focus a little bit on what that meant in terms of your body as a child. Did you feel comfortable being naked? Were your parents quite relaxed with it or not? What was your body part called? Was that a name that you felt comfortable with, or was it a bit weird that everything is called nose, ear, shoulder, and this has a weird name that no one really knows where it comes from? What were your first experiences with partners? Were you feeling seen and able to express? And then what might society be stopping you from seeing? Again, when you had a talk and you feel shame, that's a sign there's something not quite right, right? Because you're hearing talking about sexuality. I'm using the words we should be using. If we talk about dentistry, we talk about the teeth, right? So for me, it's the same. It's like I feel sometimes that sex work, which is not prostitution, sex work is like spiritual work. It's just another avenue of exploration.
God, you said so many beautiful things, especially on the second point, how you linked everything. I am pretty sure we're running out of time. So for everybody interested, please sign up to Chloe's app. We're going to put it also on everything. I'm going to ask a last question, which is slightly different. But the other evening you mentioned about women not being seen. And for example, you getting closer to 50, me now getting closer to 40. Yeah. You mentioned being an entrepreneur. You mentioned before in the corporate world. I could really relate to that. Or not necessarily not being seen, you kind of, I think in your instance in mind, like you fought your way there, you were there, but you look around and there's no one else. And somehow you're still excluded out of the main conversation. How did you overcome all of this and continue going? Because I think it takes tremendous resilience.
I mean, I think everyone should be a woman for a day, and then we should be a man for a day too, and maybe something in between. Because I feel that sometimes we just don't understand how there are differences that are fundamental, and those differences contribute to creating a balanced culture and society. And as a young woman in a professional world that was quite male-orientated as an architect, etc., I learned to work with men. I learned to use being a woman as an asset, not at all to manipulate, but actually more to present something in a different way, and it really served me. And then I got burned for being a woman, and I felt discriminated in times in my career, and that was very painful because I felt always I wasn't one of those people who would say being a woman is a negative thing in business. I always thought it was a very big opportunity, for us to bring something different. And so what I've noticed is simply that the script around women, whether it's a woman in their 20s, a woman in their 30s, or their 40s or their 50s, doesn't truly reflect what it means to be an empowered woman. In your 20s, it's all about your external beauty and, turning on the world based on that. Then in your 30s, there's expectation you should be having children and you are in your biological age. Then in your 40s, you're starting to shift, and that's the big tangent point for women, because they are already going from their reproductive cycle into their proper sexual cycle. And then in the 50s, you disappear. There's just no more women for you to look at in society. It's coming, it's changing. But whether it's in films, in the media, advertising, there is just no woman that you could look at thinking, I want to be like her, or that narrative seems to be integrated in society. Very often, those women that you admire, they are saying something different that's actually not integrated. So what I'm trying to do, again, is to bridge, is to research first what could be a new narrative for women who are no longer considered to be in the young group, and how can we reclaim and reconnect with the values that women were bringing in society, maybe in more ancient civilization, in terms of their wisdom and their ability to actually express womanhood and femininity and sexual energy that has nothing to do with procreation, that has to do with getting that femininity, that feminine energy out into the world so that they can be more balanced out there, and creating spaces like I do with my retreat, where a woman can be sexually expressed without being objectified for sex. This is the idea that if a woman looks like she's sexual, we struggle to think that she wants something else than sex. And I think this is something that really will change our relationship with pleasure and sexuality, is when we will be able to disconnect that sexual energy and sexuality has nothing to do with the sex you're having with other people. And it's also really nothing to do with reproduction. It has a part of it. It's really to do with who you are as a sexual being, and how your expression of that is really necessary to repair some of the big societal trauma and inegalities that exist, and that we need to continue to shift the paradigm and find new narrative that I would be proud to represent as a woman coming into 50, and not the menopausal, no longer sexual, can't fit on any brackets on a dating app, shouldn't really be sexy or expressed or showing her body or whatever, we're being told to shame us and shut us down.
Chloe, thank you so much. I think that the essence of everything you do is truly helping individuals embrace their authentic self, but in the true sense, not in this mindsets, for example. And I believe ultimately if we do that to the point is that we cannot be manipulated. We are good human, and we do good by ourselves, by others, and even the world. So I think it's so important. And you're doing it from an angle where others don't dare to go. And I think therefore it's very empowering. And so I want to thank you for your work, but I also want to thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed, and especially I welcome your initiative, because it is when I talk about sexuality on platforms where it's not the focus, that I get the most benefit, because I think if we reshape this conversation as part of the conversation and we don't just talk about sex in specialized platform with specialized people, that's I think when the change can come.
Wonderful, thank you.